Ethan Caldwell was not born into privilege. On a cold November morning in 1985, he took his first breath in the small town of Brookfield, Illinois, nestled in the heart of the Midwest. His parents, James and Linda Caldwell, owned a modest roadside diner where truckers, locals, and families gathered for warm meals and friendly chatter. It was within those four walls that Ethan learned the value of persistence and ambition. Even as a kid, he saw possibilities where others saw dead ends. In middle school, he earned extra cash mowing lawns and shoveling driveways. By high school, he was fixing neighbors' computers, always on the lookout for the next big opportunity. His sharp business instincts and tireless work ethic earned him a full-ride scholarship to Northwestern University, a place that would change his life forever. While his peers spent their weekends at fraternity parties, Ethan was buried in finance textbooks, fascinated by the endless potential of the digital economy. It was during his sophomore year that he met Hannah Reed, a psychology major with an easygoing smile and a heart that understood people in ways Ethan never could. She lived 2 floors below him in the dorms, and at first they barely spoke, just quick nods in passing or awkward small talk at campus events. That all changed one autumn afternoon when they both signed up for a community service project. Side by side, they painted walls, scrubbed floors, and laughed over their messy handiwork. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, a balance of contrasts where Ethan was fiercely driven, Hannah was grounded in compassion. She reminded him that success wasn't just about power and wealth, it was about people, integrity, and purpose. Over time, their connection deepened. They challenged each other, supported each other, and eventually fell in love. By graduation, they were inseparable. A year later, they were married, chasing dreams together in Chicago, where Ethan took an entry-level position at a tech startup, while Hannah dedicated her career to mental health advocacy. Success came fast. Ethan's sharp instincts and bold decision-making launched him into the elite circles of business. By his early 30s, he had become a millionaire husband, sealing deals with investors, attending exclusive galas, and living a life they had once only imagined. But with newfound wealth came new pressures, and unseen cracks began forming in their marriage, setting the stage for a storm neither of them saw coming. Ethan's rise to success was nothing short of meteoric. What started as an entry-level job at a tech startup quickly turned into a string of promotions, each one catapulting him further into the world of high-stakes business. His sharp instincts and ability to close deals earned him the respect of his mentors and the admiration of investors. By the time he reached his early 30s, he wasn't just another rising executive. He was a self-made millionaire, a man whose name carried weight in elite business circles. The more his wealth grew, the more his world expanded. Exclusive networking events, high-profile charity galas, and international business trips filled his calendar. What used to be quiet dinners at home with Hannah became rushed phone calls between meetings. His once simple life had turned into a whirlwind of power and prestige. At first, Hannah embraced his success with quiet pride. She had always known Ethan was destined for great things. But as his business empire flourished, something between them began to shift. Their small Chicago apartment, once filled with laughter and late-night conversations, started feeling emptier. Ethan was home less and less, and even when he was physically present, his mind was always elsewhere. On the next deal, the next expansion, the next milestone. She tried to hold on to the bond they had built. She planned romantic weekend getaways, but he was always too busy. She arranged quiet dinners, hoping to steal a few moments of his undivided attention, only for his phone to ring with yet another urgent call. Through it all, Hannah remained steadfast, believing that this was just a phase, that once the dust settled, Ethan would return to her in the way he once had. But what he didn't know was that she had a secret, a life-changing one. Hannah was pregnant. She had discovered it weeks ago, the faint pink lines on the test shocking her into silence. She had rehearsed the moment she would tell Ethan 100 times in her head, imagining the joy on his face, the way he'd scoop her into his arms and promise to be the best father he could be. But the timing never seemed right. Every time she tried, something interrupted. The buzzing of his phone, a last-minute meeting, a business trip that couldn't wait. The weight of unspoken words pressed heavily on her. She wasn't just a pregnant wife waiting for the right moment. She was a woman watching the man she loved drift further away, unsure if he would ever find his way back. And deep down, a quiet fear gnawed at her. What if she wasn't enough to bring him home? The Caldwell mansion in the affluent neighborhood of Ridgewood Heights was a masterpiece of modern architecture. Gleaming marble floors, towering glass windows, and a breathtaking view of the Chicago skyline. It was everything Ethan had dreamed of, a symbol of his relentless ambition and success. But for Hannah, the house no longer felt like a home. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the distance between them became unbearable. Maybe it was the first time Ethan canceled one of her carefully planned date nights, claiming an important investor dinner. Or maybe it was when he left for Tokyo on a 2-week business trip with barely a day's notice. Each time, she forced a smile and told herself she understood. But deep down, every broken promise chipped away at the foundation of their marriage. Her mother, Karen Reed, had begun to notice. "Sweetheart, you look exhausted," she said one evening over tea. "Are you and Ethan getting enough time together?" Hannah brushed off her concerns with a practiced smile. "He's just busy with work, Mom. Things will slow down soon." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. Hannah had given up her career at the nonprofit to run the philanthropic branch of Ethan's company. At first, she found purpose in the work, overseeing charity initiatives and scholarship programs. But no matter how meaningful her role was, it paled in comparison to Ethan's growing empire. At business galas, he was the center of attention, investors, executives, and reporters all vying for a moment of his time, while she lingered on the sidelines, reduced to a silent observer in his world. Still, she refused to give up. She suggested marriage counseling, but Ethan canceled their appointment twice. She surprised him at the office with a homemade lunch, only to be turned away by his assistant. And then, the real doubts started creeping in. Lately, Ethan had been more guarded with his phone. He spent nights in his study, whispering into calls, his laptop screen turned away whenever she walked by. He was working late more often, claiming urgent meetings that didn't add up. Hannah had never been the jealous type, but something felt different this time. A wife knows when something is wrong. What made it even harder to bear was the secret she was still holding on to. She was a pregnant wife, carrying his child, and he had no idea. Every night she lay awake, one hand resting on her stomach, wondering if she should tell him, or if he had already chosen a different life, one that no longer included her. Hannah had always trusted Ethan, implicitly. He had never given her a reason not to, until now. It started with the small things, late-night meetings that stretched into early mornings, vague explanations about new business ventures, and the way he always seemed just a little too absorbed in his phone. But she told herself she was imagining things. He was building an empire, after all. He had always been ambitious, always chasing the next deal. Then came the night of the Blackstone Foundation Gala, an event attended by Chicago's wealthiest and most influential. Hannah moved through the glittering ballroom, making polite conversation with donors, when she spotted Ethan across the room. He wasn't alone. The woman at his side was stunning, tall, brunette, effortlessly poised in a sleek black dress. She laughed at something Ethan said, touching his arm with a familiarity that sent a cold prickle down Hannah's spine. The look in her husband's eyes, the way they shone with something dangerously close to admiration, made her stomach churn. Her name, she would later learn, was Lana Whitmore, a rising star in the luxury real estate market. Just another business contact, Hannah told herself. But the unease lingered long after the night ended. She tried to dismiss her suspicions, tried to convince herself that Ethan's distance was just a phase. But doubt had a way of creeping in, whispering in the quiet hours of the night. And then she found the receipt. It was tucked inside the pocket of Ethan's suit jacket, a crisp slip of paper from an upscale jewelry boutique. The date on it was recent. The price was staggering. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe it was for her. Maybe he had planned a surprise. But as the days passed, no velvet box appeared. No unexpected gift. Just more late nights, more unanswered calls, more excuses. The first seeds of mistrust took root, growing heavier with every passing day. She should have confronted him, demanded answers. But how could she, when she still hadn't told him the truth? She was a pregnant wife, carrying his child, and he didn't even know. She had waited for the perfect moment, but now she wondered if there would ever be one. Because for the first time in their marriage, Hannah wasn't sure she truly knew the man she had built her life with. And deep down, she feared that by the time she did, it would already be too late. Ethan had spent years thriving in high-stakes negotiations, where power and influence dictated success. But somewhere along the way, the adrenaline rush of sealing business deals began to overshadow everything else, including his marriage. When Lana Whitmore entered his world, the shift was almost imperceptible at first. She was introduced at an exclusive networking event by Nathan Bishop, a well-known investor in the luxury real estate market. Lana carried herself with effortless confidence, her presence magnetic in a way that commanded attention. Their conversations started as strictly professional, discussions about investment opportunities and architectural trends. Then came the late-night business dinners, the extended phone calls, the knowing glances exchanged across crowded rooms. It was easy to justify. Networking was a critical part of his job. But Ethan couldn't ignore the fact that he listened to Lana more intently than he had listened to anyone in a long time. She was bold, exciting, uninhibited, everything his life with Hannah no longer felt like. At first, he reassured himself that there was nothing wrong. After all, he hadn't crossed any lines. But with each unanswered text from Hannah, each excuse to stay out just a little later, his moral boundaries blurred. Soon, private meetings in sleek hotel lounges replaced their usual business lunches. Eventually, he found himself standing outside Lana's high-rise apartment, knowing full well that once he walked in, there would be no going back. The night of the Belford Investment Conference in Los Angeles was when the final line was crossed. The dinner meeting stretched into drinks in Lana's suite, where an intoxicating mix of attraction and ego pushed aside whatever guilt he should have felt. By morning, he expected regret to sink in, but instead he felt something else: control. The thrill of having it all. A successful career, a beautiful home, a devoted wife, and now this. Lana was no fool. She knew he was married, but she seemed to enjoy the secrecy, the power of holding his attention. She stroked his ego, whispered how powerful he was, how irresistible. Whenever he hesitated, she would remind him of what they had, something new, something exhilarating. And so, the cycle continued. At home, Hannah still greeted him with warmth, still tried to reach him in quiet moments between business calls. But now, even her gentle smiles felt like expectations rather than love. The woman who had once been his anchor now felt like another part of the life he had outgrown. And what made it worse, what made it almost unbearable, was that she was a pregnant wife, carrying his child, while he was slipping further away from the life they had built together. Ethan told himself he wasn't doing anything wrong. He had never laid a hand on Hannah in anger, never denied her the luxury their wealth could afford. If anything, he was giving her a life most people only dreamed of. Men in power did this all the time. Why should he be any different? And yet, in the quietest moments, when the glow of his phone screen faded and the sound of Lana Whitmore's voice was replaced by silence, guilt gnawed at him. He would glance at the framed wedding photo in his study, Hannah, radiant in her white gown, looking at him like he was the only man in the world. He would remember their first tiny apartment, how they used to laugh over cheap takeout, how she had believed in him long before the world did. For a fleeting second, regret would settle in his chest. But then his phone would buzz. A message from Lana, an invitation to an exclusive investment property unveiling or a private rooftop dinner. And just like that, he would push the guilt aside. Meanwhile, Hannah's unease had transformed into something more concrete. The unexplained charges on their credit card statements, the missed calls that went unanswered, the coldness that had crept into their bedroom, turning their once intimate space into something unrecognizable. She had no hard evidence, but the feeling was there, an unshakable certainty growing stronger by the day. Yet she held back. Not out of fear, but because of the secret she carried. She was a pregnant wife, and every passing moment without telling Ethan felt like an eternity. She had dreamed of sharing the news in a moment of pure joy, of seeing the excitement in his eyes. But that dream had faded. Now she was terrified that when she did tell him, his response would not be joy, but indifference. And then, there was Lana. To the outside world, Lana Whitmore was an up-and-coming force in luxury real estate, a woman who had clawed her way to success with relentless ambition. But behind the polished exterior was a woman who had learned early that power came not just from money, but from the people you aligned yourself with. She had no illusions about Ethan's marriage. In fact, she welcomed the challenge. She saw in him what she had seen in countless other powerful men: restlessness, a hunger for something more, and she knew how to make herself indispensable to men like him. For her, this was never just an affair. It was a carefully calculated step toward the life she had always wanted. Neither Ethan nor Hannah knew it yet, but the fragile world they had built was on the verge of collapse. And the moment that would shatter everything was approaching far faster than either of them expected. Lana had never been one to feel guilt. She knew Ethan was married, but in her eyes, Hannah was merely a remnant of his past. A woman who had been useful in his early years, but had no place in the life he was building now. Lana thrived in the world of exclusive real estate deals, a realm where power and status dictated success. She had always been drawn to men like Ethan, driven, wealthy, and dangerously restless. The late-night dinners, the private conversations whispered over glasses of top-shelf whiskey. It all gave her the rush she craved. Over drinks in dimly lit cocktail lounges, she confided in her closest friend, Ava Sinclair, a high-profile interior designer who catered to the city's elite. Ava listened with mild amusement as Lana detailed how Ethan was slipping further into her grasp, how he neglected to return home until late, how easily he melted under her touch. "You're playing a dangerous game," Ava warned, swirling her wine. "He has a wife, and men like him don't always choose the mistress in the end." Lana only smirked. "That's because they've never met a woman like me." What she failed to realize, however, was that the walls were already closing in. Rumors had begun spreading through Chicago's investment circles. Conversations grew hushed when Ethan entered a room. His closest friend, Daniel Carter, had already sensed something was off. One evening, over bourbon, he confronted Ethan directly. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Daniel asked, watching his friend carefully. Ethan scoffed, brushing off the concern. "Lana's just a friend. You're overthinking it." But Daniel wasn't convinced. He had seen this before, powerful men believing they were untouchable, only to watch their lives implode. If Ethan wouldn't listen, he'd have to keep an eye on things himself. Meanwhile, Hannah was drowning in silence. She had tried to tell Ethan about the baby a week ago, but he had cut her off, murmuring something about an urgent meeting before walking away. The rejection had been swift, unintentional even, but it had shattered something inside her. She spent her days wandering the vast, empty mansion, a house that once felt warm, but now felt like a gilded prison. She wanted to believe that the man she had married was still in there somewhere, that the love they had built was strong enough to withstand whatever was pulling him away. But every passing day made it harder to hold on to that hope. She was a pregnant wife, carrying the child of a man who barely seemed to notice her anymore. And the terrifying truth was, she was starting to wonder if he ever would again. Hannah had spent years believing in Ethan. Even now, she wanted to convince herself that the man she had fallen in love with, the man who once ran through the Northwestern University library just to make her laugh, was still there. But those memories felt like echoes of a life that no longer existed. On the nights she couldn't sleep, she would drive to her mother's house in Oakwood, just outside the city. Karen Reed didn't ask too many questions, but she could sense her daughter's pain. "You have to believe in yourself, sweetheart," Karen murmured one evening, squeezing Hannah's hands as they sat in the softly lit living room. "You're stronger than you think." Hannah nodded, blinking back tears, but her mother's reassurance couldn't quiet the storm brewing inside her. That same storm raged in Lana Whitmore, though hers was fueled by ambition. She wasn't just content being Ethan's secret. She saw herself standing in his high-rise penthouse, the new queen of his world. She imagined hosting exclusive luxury investment dinners, claiming her place at his side, and pushing Hannah into the past where she belonged. Lana had always believed that women like Hannah, soft, patient, forgiving, were meant to be left behind. She was sure that once Ethan saw how effortless and exciting life with her could be, he would finally choose her. What neither of them realized was that the confrontation between them was no longer avoidable. Hannah's pregnancy was becoming impossible to ignore. She was already several weeks along, and every morning brought a new wave of nausea, a reminder of the secret she still hadn't told Ethan. She had wanted to wait for the right moment, but now she wasn't sure one would ever come. Her OB/GYN, Dr. Melissa Carter, had urged her to reduce her stress, warning that emotional turmoil could be dangerous for the baby. But how could she relax when her entire world felt like it was crumbling? Ethan barely noticed the changes in her. He came home late, whispered weak excuses about meetings and urgent client dinners, but Hannah wasn't naive. One afternoon, as she folded baby clothes she had bought in secret, her phone buzzed. Daniel Carter's name flashed on the screen. A strange chill ran through her as she answered. Daniel's voice was careful but firm. "Hannah, I don't want to overstep, but something's wrong. Ethan isn't himself, and I think you need to look closer." His words sent ice through her veins. She had spent months avoiding the truth, hoping things would fix themselves. But deep down, she knew. She was a pregnant wife, and the man she had married was slipping further away. It was time to face reality. Hannah had spent months ignoring the signs, convincing herself that the late nights, the distant stares, and the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume were just coincidences. But Daniel's warning had shattered any last remnants of denial. She wasn't ready to confront Ethan directly, not yet. She needed proof. So she started paying closer attention. She kept a small notebook hidden in her nightstand, jotting down details, missed calls, unexplained transactions, the nights he claimed to be stuck in client meetings at the Monroe Club. She checked his credit card statements, her heart sinking when she saw charges at the Ember Lounge, a place notorious for its discreet VIP services. Then came the receipt. It was tucked into the pocket of his suit jacket, a purchase from an upscale florist. She had never received those flowers. Her hands shook as she put the pieces together. She had spent weeks hoping she was wrong, but now the truth was staring her in the face, and yet through the shock and betrayal, she felt something unexpected. Clarity. Ethan, on the other hand, was unraveling. Hannah's demeanor had shifted. She was quieter, more measured, her usual warmth replaced by something unreadable. He told himself he should come clean, but every time he thought about confessing, Lana's voice crept into his mind. "Why complicate things?" She had whispered just last night. "You have everything under control." But did he? One evening, as they sat across from each other at dinner, Hannah tested him. "I was thinking," she said, keeping her voice even, "maybe I'll come with you on your next business trip." The fork in Ethan's hand froze midair. His mind raced for an excuse. "It's mostly technical meetings. Not very interesting." Hannah watched the flicker of panic in his eyes, and just like that, she knew. Later that night, as Ethan stood by the window, whiskey in hand, staring out at the city skyline, Hannah sat alone in their bedroom, one hand resting on her stomach. She was a pregnant wife, and the father of her child was keeping secrets. The walls of their marriage were crumbling, and soon there would be nothing left to salvage. Ethan stood by the window of his penthouse, whiskey swirling in his glass, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. He had spent years mastering negotiations, knowing exactly what to say to close a deal, but when it came to Hannah, the words escaped him. He had convinced himself for months that he could maintain this double life, that his nights spent in exclusive lounges and whispered conversations with Lana wouldn't catch up to him. But deep down, he knew Hannah wasn't blind. She saw through his excuses, felt the space growing between them, and still, she had said nothing. That silence terrified him more than any confrontation ever could. Hannah, however, was done pretending. She sat on the edge of their bed, hand resting on her stomach, feeling the life growing inside her. She had imagined this moment so differently, telling Ethan over a candlelit dinner, his face lighting up with joy. Instead, he was becoming a stranger, slipping through her fingers with each passing day. The house they had built together, once filled with laughter, felt hollow, its walls hiding too many secrets. And somewhere in the shadows, Lana Whitmore waited, confident that she would win in the end. That night, Ethan claimed he had a business dinner. Hannah didn't argue. She simply nodded, watching as he straightened his tie and walked out the door, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken lies. But an hour before his supposed meeting, Hannah drove past the Ember Room, a private club known for its discreet clientele. There, parked in the VIP lot, was Ethan's sleek black Aston Martin. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, but she kept driving, unwilling to let her emotions explode in public. Hours later, well past midnight, Ethan stumbled through the front door. Except this time, he wasn't alone. Lana was draped over his arm, her crimson dress hugging every curve, heels clicking against the marble floor. The scent of top-shelf whiskey and expensive perfume clung to them. Hannah, sitting in the dim glow of the living room lamp, shot upright. Despite all her suspicions, she had never imagined he would bring his mistress into their home. Ethan's glassy eyes struggled to focus on her. He opened his mouth to speak, but the alcohol stole his ability to form a coherent sentence. Lana, however, had no such trouble. She smirked, running a manicured hand through her dark waves. "Oh," she drawled, eyes glinting with amusement. "I didn't think you'd still be awake." Hannah felt something inside her snap. She wasn't just a pregnant wife being betrayed, she was a woman pushed past her breaking point, and tonight, she wasn't going to stay silent. Lana tilted her head, a smirk playing at her lips. "Oh," she drawled, eyes gleaming with amusement. "I didn't think you'd still be awake." A sharp heat rushed through Hannah's veins. She had envisioned this confrontation 100 times, but none had been this brazen. "Clearly," she said, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury, "you're not the only one who miscalculated." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening around Lana's arm as if he could quietly guide her upstairs. Out of sight, out of consequence. But Hannah stepped in front of them, blocking their path. Her gaze flicked between the man she once trusted and the stranger he had become. "Ethan," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "What the hell are you doing? How dare you bring her here?" Before he could respond, Lana let out a tipsy giggle, leaning against the banister with practiced ease. "Relax," she purred. "He was just showing me where he lives." "Showing you where he lives?" Hannah repeated coldly, her eyes narrowing. The sheer disrespect of it sent a fresh wave of nausea through her, but she swallowed it down. Ethan looked away, his face contorted in something resembling shame. But shame wasn't enough. "Get her out," Hannah said, her voice sharp as glass. "Right now." Ethan stammered, the liquor in his system making his words sluggish, but Lana didn't budge. She crossed her arms and smirked. "If you really cared about him," she taunted, "you'd see that you two are done. He needs someone who can keep up with him, not a wife stuck in." Hannah's fists clenched. She refused to stoop to Lana's level of cruelty. Her fight wasn't with the other woman. It was with the man who had betrayed her. "I won't say it again, Ethan. Get out." Eventually, Ethan managed to coax Lana outside, though not before she cast a venomous look over her shoulder. The front door slammed shut behind them, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Hannah stood frozen, her heart pounding. Had she just witnessed the end of her marriage? Minutes later, Ethan returned alone, his posture unsteady, his expression unreadable. Hannah's arms folded tightly across her chest as she fixed him with an unwavering stare. The air between them was thick, a suffocating mix of anger and heartbreak. Ethan opened his mouth, but Hannah silenced him with a single, cutting sentence. "Don't say anything. I can't even look at you." And for the first time he understood that this wasn't just an argument. This was the moment he lost the woman he swore he'd never hurt. She was a pregnant wife, standing in the ruins of the life they had built together, and Ethan had no one to blame but himself. Hannah didn't look back as she walked upstairs, leaving Ethan standing alone in the foyer, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The sound of the bedroom door slamming echoed through the mansion, a final, resounding judgment. He sank against the wall, head in his hands, the alcohol in his system doing little to dull the sickening realization. He had just destroyed the one thing he never thought he'd lose. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the devastation inside the Caldwell estate. And somewhere in the quiet of her own heart, a wife scorned was finding a strength she never knew she possessed. The next morning, the house felt eerily still. Hannah woke up to an empty space beside her, though she had no desire to check if Ethan had slept in the guest room. Her head throbbed from a mixture of exhaustion and betrayal, but underneath it all, she felt an unfamiliar sense of clarity. The reckoning had come. She stood before the bathroom mirror, her eyes swollen from the night before, but her posture unyielding. As she pressed a hand gently against her abdomen, a powerful thought settled over her. She wasn't alone. If she had ever needed a reason to face Ethan, their unborn child was it. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the dining table, a cup of black coffee clutched in his hands. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, as though he hadn't slept at all. When Hannah entered the room, he stood abruptly, fumbling for words. "Hannah, She raised a hand, cutting him off. "I don't want apologies. I want the truth." His gaze darted away, searching for an excuse that might soften the impact of what had already been exposed. "Lana was just a mistake," he mumbled. "I was drunk, and—" "Stop," Hannah said, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Don't insult me. We both know this didn't start last night." Ethan exhaled shakily, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own guilt. "I never meant for this to go so far," he admitted. "I swear." Hannah let out a slow breath, every muscle in her body coiled tight with restraint. "You brought her here," she said, voice trembling. "Into our home, Ethan. Do you even understand how humiliating that is, after everything we've been through?" She had been many things, his partner, his anchor, his biggest supporter. But she was no longer just a wife betrayed. She was a pregnant wife, and she would not let her child grow up in a house built on lies. Ethan couldn't meet her gaze. "I was drunk," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Hannah stood motionless, watching him. But it wasn't sadness that consumed her, it was fury, raw and unfiltered. She clenched her fists at her sides, forcing herself to stay calm. "Tell me," she said, her voice controlled but sharp. "Do you love her?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then, finally, he shook his head, eyes cast downward. "No," he admitted. "It was never about love." A long, trembling breath escaped Hannah's lips as her fingers gripped the back of a dining chair. This was her moment, to speak her truth, to decide what came next. "Everything we built together, our marriage, our home, our future, you threw it away like it meant nothing." Ethan wiped a hand across his face, anguish twisting his features. "I don't want to lose you." Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Then why didn't you stop?" Her voice broke, but she kept going. "All those nights you lied to me, lied to yourself. Why?" He swallowed hard, struggling for words. I can't explain it. I was selfish, chasing excitement. But you have to believe me, I never wanted to hurt you." A bitter laugh slipped from Hannah's lips. "But you did, Ethan. You ripped us apart." She inhaled sharply, steeling herself for what she was about to say. The words burned at the back of her throat, but she refused to hold them in any longer. "I'm pregnant." Ethan's head snapped up. Shock, confusion, guilt. It all flashed across his face in an instant. You're pregnant?" His voice wavered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Because you were never here. And even when you were, you weren't really here. I was afraid it would only push us further apart." Her voice faltered, and for the briefest moment, she considered walking away, leaving him alone with his regrets. Ethan stood frozen, as if reality had just crashed over him. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. The room was thick with tension, their marriage, their family, hanging on the edge of a knife. Then, with startling clarity, Hannah spoke a single word. "Leave." Ethan flinched. "Hannah," she lifted her chin, her voice steady. "You can come back when you decide who you want to be, and if there's even a chance I can forgive you." She turned toward the staircase. "But for now, go. I don't want to look at you." Ethan stood there, stunned, as if waiting for her to take it back. "Go," she repeated, her voice like a gavel striking down judgment. And this time, he listened. She was a pregnant wife, left standing in the wreckage of a life she no longer recognized. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The door clicked shut behind Ethan, leaving the mansion in suffocating silence. Hannah slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The weight of her own words still echoed in the empty space. She had spent years fighting for her marriage, enduring heartbreak after heartbreak, hoping Ethan would return to the man she once knew. But now, she understood something she hadn't before. Real love demanded respect, and sometimes, the strongest act of love was choosing herself, even if it meant letting go. By the end of the week, Whispers of the Caldwell marriage crisis spread through Chicago's elite circles. At private clubs, luxury penthouses, and high-powered boardrooms, speculation ran wild. Some claimed Ethan had been locked out of the mansion indefinitely. Others whispered that Hannah had already served him divorce papers. There were even rumors that Lana Whitmore was practically living in his penthouse at the Sterling Tower, a luxury high-rise overlooking the river. In truth, none of it was quite accurate. Ethan had retreated to one of his corporate apartments, a sterile, impersonal space on the 26th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The panoramic city view stretched before him, but all he saw was emptiness. Nights were the worst. He spent them nursing his regrets, replaying Hannah's tear-streaked face, the way her voice had trembled but never broken when she told him to leave. Lana had called and texted him relentlessly, but his responses were short and distant. The excitement she once offered had faded, replaced by an overwhelming sense of shame. He ignored her invitations to exclusive events, let her calls go to voicemail. Until one afternoon when she showed up unannounced, pounding on his door until he had no choice but to let her in. "What's going on, Ethan?" Lana demanded, stalking into the apartment like a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Are you just going to shut me out now that your wife caught on?" Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "Things have changed, Lana. I need time to think," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Think about what? You already made your choice when you left her house." He let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "No, she told me to leave. There's a difference." Lana's eyes flashed with irritation, but Ethan was no longer looking at her. His mind was elsewhere. On the woman he had betrayed, the home he had been cast out of, and the pregnant wife he had abandoned in his selfish pursuit of something fleeting. For the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had lost. "So what now?" Lana's voice was sharp, her frustration barely concealed. "You're going to beg for her forgiveness? She already kicked you out, Ethan. You might as well move on." Ethan looked away, wrestling with emotions that refused to settle. The memory of Hannah's trembling voice when she told him she was pregnant was still fresh, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. "You don't understand," he murmured. "I love her. I always have. And now, she's carrying my child." Lana's expression shifted, just for a second. A flicker of something almost like pain crossed her face, though she quickly masked it. She had always known deep down that Ethan was never truly hers, but hearing him say it aloud, that stung. She grabbed her purse, standing abruptly. "Fine," she snapped. "If you ever decide you actually want me, you know where to find me, but I won't wait forever." The door slammed behind her. Ethan exhaled, feeling both relief and sorrow. In just a few short weeks, he had lost everything: his wife's trust, his child's future, and even the empty thrill he had chased. Now alone in his sterile corporate apartment, he wondered if redemption was even possible. Meanwhile, Hannah was navigating her own storm of emotions. She had finally confided in her mother, Karen Reed, who had offered unwavering support. "Come stay with me if you need to," Karen had pleaded. But Hannah refused to leave the Caldwell estate. This was still her home. And it was no longer about Ethan, it was about the baby growing inside her. She threw herself into rebuilding her life, designing a nursery, scheduling appointments with Dr. Carter, and even resuming some of her philanthropic work. But at night, the memories crept in. The way Ethan used to spin her around the kitchen while they cooked, the whispered "I love yous" that once felt unbreakable. More than once, she broke down, sinking onto the couch, silent sobs shaking her frame. But every morning she found the strength to rise again. David Carter visited often, offering both emotional support and practical advice. "You should take a more active role in the company," he suggested one afternoon. "You're a shareholder, Hannah. If things go south, you need to protect yourself financially." She hesitated. The thought of entangling herself further in Ethan's empire made her stomach turn. But she had a child to think about. A pregnant wife couldn't afford to be reckless. Every so often, Ethan called. His voicemails ranged from apologetic to desperate. Hannah never picked up. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Hannah listened to each voicemail in full, silent tears burning her eyes. Yet she never called back. She knew they both needed space. Telling Ethan to leave had been painful. But maybe, just maybe, Ripping off the bandage was the only way either of them could begin to heal. Outside their personal wreckage, Chicago's high society moved on, filling cocktail parties and boardrooms with the latest whispers of scandal. Lena, once so confident in her place beside Ethan, found herself dodging questions at networking events, offering half-hearted denials before withdrawing from the public eye. The affair that once gave her an intoxicating thrill had lost its luster. Now she was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a woman who had bet on another's downfall and lost. Meanwhile, the Caldwell empire faced its own reckoning. Investors murmured behind closed doors, some pulling out of key projects, while others reassured Ethan's executives that personal scandals could be contained. But reputation was a fragile thing. Deals moved slower, partners hesitated, and for the first time in his career, Ethan felt the sharp edge of uncertainty pressing into him. Yet, in the midst of chaos, Hannah discovered something new: her own resilience. She had always defined herself as a loyal wife, a quiet force behind Ethan's success. But now, standing alone, she realized her worth wasn't tied to him. She was strong, capable, and deserving of more than empty apologies. Soon enough, she and Ethan would have to face each other again. This time, their choices would no longer be about them alone, but about the child whose future hung in the balance. Weeks blurred into a month. The scandal, once the talk of the city, faded from tabloids, replaced by fresher gossip. But for those caught in its wake, the consequences remained. Ethan buried himself in work, using late nights at his corporate office as an escape. He finalized 2 major deals, reassuring investors that his personal life wouldn't dismantle his empire. But no matter how many contracts he signed, no matter how many meetings he attended, his mind drifted back to Hannah, the pregnant wife he had abandoned. She wasn't just part of his life. She had been the heart of it. What once seemed thrilling now felt meaningless. The luxury high-rise, the sleek corporate power moves, the affair that had promised excitement, it all felt empty in the absence of her presence. One rainy afternoon, David Carter arrived unannounced. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Are you done running yet?" Ethan didn't have an answer, but he knew it was time to find one. "You need to fix this." David's voice was firm. "She's doing better without you, if I'm being honest. But you owe her at least an honest conversation." Ethan sat in silence, staring at the rain trickling down the window of his corporate apartment. "I know," he muttered. "I just don't know what to say." David sighed. "Start with the truth, apologize, and if you really want to be a father, you need to prove it to Hannah." Ethan nodded, his throat tightening. "I hate what I did to her," he whispered. "I hate myself for it." That same day, Lana Whitmore quietly resigned from her real estate firm. The official statement claimed she was taking a sabbatical to focus on personal projects, but those in Chicago's business world knew the truth. Her reputation had taken a fatal hit. Clients no longer trusted her. The scandal had cost her more than she anticipated. She never reached out to Ethan again. Though late one night, a single text buzzed on his phone. "We had fun, but everything ends. Good luck." He stared at it for a moment before deleting it. No response, no closure, just silence. Meanwhile, Hannah found solace in her growing baby bump, now impossible to hide. With her mother's support, she transformed one of the mansion's spare rooms into a nursery. Soft yellow walls, pastel accents, a rocking chair by the window. She still dreaded the possibility of raising the baby alone, but something had shifted inside her. Excitement began to bloom beneath the heartbreak. One evening, as she folded tiny baby clothes, she held up a pair of soft blue socks. The realization hit: one day, her child would take their first steps on these marble floors. Her eyes welled with tears, torn between longing and hope. Would Ethan be there for those moments? Or would she face them alone? As if in answer, her phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. Her pulse quickened. She considered ignoring it, letting it go to voicemail. But something, perhaps the part of her that still remembered the man he used to be, made her press accept. "Hello?" Her voice was hesitant. Ethan's voice was strained but sincere. "Hannah, can we talk?" Silence stretched between them. Finally, she exhaled. "Tomorrow. Afternoon? Here." When Ethan arrived at the Caldwell estate, he looked different. Pale, anxious, remorseful. Gone was the arrogance, the polished confidence. He wore a simple suit, a stark contrast to his usual power-tailored image. Hannah led him into the living room. They sat on separate couches that felt miles apart. Ethan cleared his throat. "Hannah, I can't take back what I did, but I want to try to make amends, if you'll let me." His voice cracked. "I want to be here for you and for our child." She was a pregnant wife, staring at the man who had broken her heart, and tomorrow she would decide if he deserved a second chance. Hannah took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Why should I believe you?" Ethan clasped his hands, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Because I can't live with myself if I don't try," he admitted. "I've cut off all contact with Lana. It's over. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why." His voice faltered. He looked up, eyes glistening. "Why I destroyed everything." He swallowed hard. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I need you to know that I'm committed to changing." Hannah's throat tightened, but she held firm. "Commitment isn't just words, Ethan. It's actions, day after day. I told you to leave because I needed space, and I still need to see proof that you've changed." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I understand." A long silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken wounds and the faintest glimmer of hope. Finally, Hannah folded her arms over her growing belly, protecting the life inside her. "I'm willing to see if you can keep your word," she said cautiously. "For the baby's sake, if nothing else." Ethan exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes." She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "This isn't a second chance, Ethan. It's a test. Don't fail it." With that, she led him to the door. Each step echoed in the grand hallway, underscoring the fragile nature of their future. Outside, storm clouds gathered, casting shadows over the Caldwell estate. Inside, Hannah pressed her back against the closed door. A part of her wanted to break down, but another part felt something new, an unfamiliar stir of strength. She had set her boundaries. She had reclaimed her self-worth. Now it was up to Ethan to prove if he could meet her where she stood. Whether their story would end in redemption or ruin remained to be seen. Over the next several weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly to rebuild what he had shattered. He moved out of his corporate apartment, but didn't immediately return to the mansion. Instead, he rented a modest townhouse in Lincoln Park, close enough to be near if Hannah needed him. Gone were the late-night outings and whispered rendezvous. His days revolved around therapy, his business, and carefully timed visits to see Hannah. True to her word, she allowed him back in small increments. Sometimes, he came by to assemble the crib. Other times, they discussed parenting plans. And though she was a pregnant wife still healing from betrayal, one thing was certain. This time, she wasn't waiting for him to fix things. She was building her own future, with or without him. They weren't who they used to be. Not the young, reckless lovers, not the strangers torn apart by betrayal. Now Ethan and Hannah were two people, standing at the edge of something uncertain, bound by their past, their mistakes, and the fragile hope of a future they hadn't yet defined. Ethan came by on weekends, helping with the nursery, fixing things around the house. Conversations between them were still careful, laced with hesitation, but the walls between them had started to crack. And then the moment came. Their daughter was born, a perfect, healthy baby girl. In the sterile quiet of the hospital room, Hannah cradled their newborn, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. Beside her, Ethan sat still, his entire world shifting as he watched the tiny, wriggling life they had created. Tears slipped down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything. I promise to spend the rest of my life making it right." Hannah met his eyes, her own filled with exhaustion, with doubt, but also with something new. Not trust. Not yet. But acknowledgement. Days later, when they brought the baby home to the Caldwell estate, Hannah felt the weight of the past pressing in on her. She remembered standing in this very doorway the night Ethan had brought another woman into their home. She remembered the single word she had spoken to him then, leave. And yet here they were again. Only this time, Ethan wasn't walking through that door as a man who had betrayed her. He was walking in as the father of their child. As the days passed, she watched him closely. Not in blind hope, but in careful, measured observation. She saw him wake up for midnight feedings. She saw him read parenting books and call the pediatrician when their daughter sneezed too many times. She saw effort, patience, growth. And one evening, as he stood in the nursery, rocking their baby to sleep, she made her decision. Hannah walked up beside him, looking at their child, the bridge between their past and their future. "You can stay," she said quietly. "But not as my husband, not yet." Ethan swallowed hard, but nodded. "I'll wait," he said, "as long as it takes." For the first time, Hannah believed him. She was a pregnant wife no longer. She was a mother now, and she would never let anyone, not even Ethan, determine her worth again. And so, dear reader, this chapter closes, but their story does not end. The Caldwell estate, once a battleground of betrayal, has become a place of quiet redemption. A husband fights to prove his worth, and a pregnant wife finds the strength to decide her own fate. The true drama isn't in the fall from grace, it's in the climb back up. If this journey of heartbreak, hope, and second chances moved you, show your support. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of the human soul. Because sometimes the next dramatic twist is just a click away.